With high expectations on both sides, Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived at Mar-a-Lago Resort in Florida to meet with US counterpart Donald Trump for the first time. What tone will this meeting set for one of the world's most important bilateral relationships? After Trump's China-bashing election rhetoric, how will the two leaders achieve mutual respect and cooperation instead of confrontation, and deal with sensitive issues such as the One China policy and the South China Sea disputes? Donald Trump has repeatedly accused China of being a master manipulator of its currency and trade surplus with the US, but economic cooperation with China has been vital to American job creation, a key component of Trump's agenda. How can the leaders of the world's two biggest economies find common ground to benefit their economic and trade relations? The DPRK is high on the agenda. President Trump has said the US would solve the problem of a nuclear DPRK on its own if China is unwilling to help. After the failure of warnings and sanctions, what approach could Presidents Xi and Trump discuss that will help achieve denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula? With Trump's decision to walk away from TPP and the threat to reverse his predecessor's deal on climate change, the US and China are redefining their respective roles in the world. Is it time for China to take on more responsibility in promoting global governance and globalization?
Although tangled by issues such as the DPRK and the U.S. military action in Syria, the first meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump is expected by many to deliver beneficial results for both countries and to the world. To discuss the economic implications of this Xi-Trump meeting, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Yao Yang. He's the Dean of the National School of Development from Peking University.
This was a very important meeting. The whole world should be relieved. There will be no trade war between China and the United States.
And also joining us is Professor Paul Gillis from Guanghua School of Management from Peking University.
There were high expectations and high concerns about this meeting. Trump needed to have this meeting go smoothly after the disastrous meeting with Angela Merkel of Germany recently, and it does appear that the meeting did go smoothly.
And we'll be also joined later by Mr. Robert Koepp, I should say, director of the Economist Corporate Network via satellite from Hong Kong. And that's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Li Qiuyan sitting in for Young Rate tonight. So this was a highly anticipated summit, and some say it's like a blind date with global ramification. You said there's not going to be a trade war, so you basically said the meeting was very smoothly. What would be the economic implication coming from this meeting?
Well, it was significant for several reasons. First, the two presidents met in a very early time, right? So I think President Xi Jinping was the first foreign leader that President Trump met outside the islands. That's very significant. And also, the two presidents have agreed to continue on some of the dialogues that was going on before. So that was also significant. And on the Chinese side, President Xi Jinping proposed several steps to improve the U.S.-China relationships.
You know, some media reports picked on the details of this meeting. You mentioned earlier Trump's meeting with Merkel, and this time the media reports are saying, well, the details, looks like the meeting was fine. There was no awkward handshake. They talked about who picked up the first couple at the airport. They talked about Trump having his granddaughter even singing Chinese song to the First Lady and the President. What do you see as the chemistry between the two? Well,
I see one thing. I think the Trump team is learning on the job, and they're getting better at this. They did some rather foolish things in the Angela Merkel meeting. They presented her with a big bill, surprised her with that. And there doesn't seem there were any surprises there. Or perhaps they're learning to control the access to the information a little better, so that if anything unpleasant happened, it wasn't exposed for everyone to see.
At least there was no outward sign of tension. It was very businesslike and cordial. How do you see, going forward? Let's talk about trade. What do you think Trump would do on trade with China? Because the president has threatened trade war with China. He has warned of a difficult relationship. But will he really impose high tariffs or other forms of trade protectionism measures against China to bring jobs back?
I don't think the Trump administration is going to do that. But perhaps the administration is going to select a side and impose some tariffs. But that's just a very small part, right? On the big picture, I don't think there will be a trade war. The whole world should be relieved on this. And from the China side, President Xi Jinping proposed to continue the negotiation of the bilateral investment treaty. That's very important for China and also for the United States, particularly when President Trump is planning to start a infrastructure investment drive. And the Chinese companies can help in that aspect. And if we sign this BIT between the two countries, that's going to help the Chinese investment in the United States.
Professor Gillis, do you agree?
Picking on China was a big part of Trump's campaign. And he said a lot of things that were, by China experts, thought were really foolish, and we all wondered if he was really poorly advised. I think looking back, you'd have to say he was brilliantly advised because he got elected. But now he has to deal with the reality of actually governing. And I think he's finding that some of these flame-throwing bombs that he threw just aren't going to work. And I don't think we're going to see a 35% import tax. And labeling China a currency manipulator is probably something he'll do, but he won't do anything about it. And so I think he's looking for a more cooperative relationship and one based on more reason, which I think is what China's looking for at the same time.
Let me also bring Mr. Koepp from Hong Kong. Mr. Koepp, how did you think the meeting go? What do you think the two has managed to achieve?
Well, what they've managed to achieve, we'll have to see. Based on the statements made, it doesn't sound, on the face of it, like very much. It seems to be more with the objective to get these two leaders to sit down, to get to know each other better, and to see about how they can cooperate. Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, has mentioned about a 100-day plan for the two sides to come out with some tangible objectives to achieve together, and that's good if they follow through on that. But in terms of substantive agreement, I haven't heard of anything.
And Professor Yao, you earlier mentioned the bilateral investment agreement. What do you see as the biggest challenges now for reaching agreement between U.S. and China on this?
I think on the American side, there will be some objections from the Trump administration, because many people believe if American companies investing in China, United States is going to lose more jobs. So that's bad for the United States. But in fact, if we sign this treaty, then Chinese investment will increase in the United States. And that's going to create a lot of jobs in the United States. From the Chinese side, I think the obstacles are mainly from those ministries, because they still want to keep many of the powers. And then we have to shorten the negative list, but that's going to be really hard.
Professor Gillis, your thoughts on the prospect of BIT?
I think the 100-day project is quite significant, because I think that Trump needs to come up with some wins in this 100-day period. He's got a pretty short-term horizon for dealing with that. That said, trying to do a bilateral investment treaty or something like that is in 100 days is nearly impossible. Trade agreements often take years to be done. Now, that said, the TPP was substantially negotiated, and the bilateral investment treaty has already had significant negotiations on it. So possibly they'll be able to craft something together in the next 100 days to at least have some basic agreement on where to go forward with.
But is China an irreplaceable trading partner for the U.S.?
I think it would be very difficult for anyone to not have trade with China. China is just simply too important a part of the global economy. And that's something I think the U.S. For some time has been having trouble adjusting to, is the rise of China, and that's what's creating a lot of these conflicts.
And Mr. Koepp, what is the uniqueness about China? How can China enhance that uniqueness or its advantages?
Well, that's a big question for Chinese industry and the policy decision makers going forward, because so far it's been more low wages that have allowed a lower cost pricing of Chinese goods and services to allow it to dominate. Indeed, to your original or your previous question there, I mean, no one can avoid dealing with China. China is the world's largest trader. It's the second largest GDP economy on the planet. You couldn't cut China out unless you were to accept severe consequences. But that's been up till now. In terms of what your question to me relates to, what can China do going forward? If it really wants to maintain an edge in the global economy, it's going to have to find new sources to drive competitiveness. This would be in high tech. This would be an innovative economy, which it's been showing some promising signs with things like Tencent and Alibaba and so forth, but they don't dominate the economy. The global picture for China so far has been the low-end manufacturing.
And China is trying to upgrade its industry, moving from labor-intensive industry to technology-intensive ones. Professor Yao, now let's talk about trade deficit. Nearly half a U.S. trade deficit with China, and U.S. is not happy about this. And much of the trade deficit, though, is created by American companies operating and profiting in China. How do you view China, the U.S. blaming China for its trade deficit?
I think the Trump administration is taking a wrong approach. This is a global issue, right? This is the United States versus the rest of the world, not just versus China. You can not solve the deficit issues just chasing on one country like China. If China does not export to the United States, other countries are going to replace China. For example, Mexico or Indonesia are going to do the same, right? So in the end, the United States is going to have the same amount of trade deficit, but not with China, but with other countries. But I want to say a little bit on China's competitiveness. I don't think China's advantage today is still this low wage export. No longer. China's biggest export today is this medium level manufacturing goods. Okay, so China is improving quite quickly. Actually much quicker than we have thought.
And Trump has also promised this $1 trillion US package for rebuilding America's infrastructure. That's quite an ambitious plan, but what possible opportunities does that bring to China-U.S. cooperation in infrastructure sector, Professor?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, this is something that is very popular among Democrats, the idea of spending money on infrastructure, and has generally been opposed by Republicans who are concerned that it costs too much money and how do you pay for it. I think Trump is going to want to push forward with this, and it's an opportunity because that's going to be building roads and bridges and other infrastructure like railroads. And certainly China has the best experience in the world right now at building infrastructure. They've gone through a 30-year program of building more infrastructure than exists anywhere else in the world. But I think there will be some resistance to bringing Chinese technology and Chinese companies to help with the rebuilding of America.
Mr. Koepp, do you see the same divide between Republicans and Democrats on this rebuilding infrastructure package plan?
Well, it's an interesting conundrum they're now in. You know, Donald Trump isn't a traditional Republican. His idea of this massive spending from the public sector is unique for a Republican leader in recent memory. However, there is some precedent. The Eisenhower administration basically did the sort of thing China's done recently with the National Highway and Transportation Program. So it's not that it's totally alien, but it is unique in modern modern as in the sense of the last one or two generations. So Trump has, within his own party, obstacles. The Democrats should be on the side of infrastructure spending, government role in improving the quality of output in America. That's a traditional Democratic stance, but they're also very anti-Trump for other reasons. So it's an interesting mixture of forces. I think if he puts together a reasonable plan and he makes a better effort at crossing over, as we say, crossing the aisle to build support, it could be done.
Professor Yao, in order to facilitate cooperation in infrastructure sector, what should be done by both countries?
I think BIT is still important. Big investment in the United States still face a lot of uncertainties, particularly created by the screening process of CFIUS. Right? CFIUS screening process is not transparent, and we don't know the rule over there. And to many Chinese companies, those rules are arbitrary. If we can sign a BIT, then that's going to create huge opportunities for Chinese companies to increase investment in United States. Like Paul just said, China has advantage over there, but we have to weigh that with the political considerations in United States. Right? If, say, a high-speed rail has been built by China, what American general public is going to say about it, what CFIUS is going to reflect that. But if we have a BIT, then those issues are solved automatically.
All right, let's now take a short break on Dialogue. We'll be right back with more discussions. Don't go away. Welcome back. So earlier we talked about Trump's ambitious infrastructure plan. He also has this plan for major tax cuts. Now, Professor Gillis, what's your evaluation of that plan? What's the major challenge to it?
Well, the big challenge with doing big tax cuts is that it will increase the deficit, and the U.S. already has a huge deficit. So normally you'd look at tax cuts as something that would be a bit reckless at this point in time, but it's very much something that his conservative base wants. The Republicans have always wanted tax cuts. Now, they probably won't insist for them being paid for by spending cuts unless those spending cuts come from social programs.
By cutting taxes, Trump was hoping to bring more business back to America. How will these measures help to create jobs? Will it create jobs as Trump hopes, Professor Yao?
Well, I want to, this makes me think about the 1980s, right? President Reagan did the same thing. But the result was not that great. It was because the economy still lacks a growth impetus over there. We don't see that. So if you cut tax, I'm not sure if we are going to see more investment, private investment in the United States. But in the meantime, you just increase the deficit, like a Reagan administration did, right? So probably we have to wait for several years. So the Trump administration probably is paving road for the next president to reap the benefits.
What about the second term? Will he achieve the result that he was aiming for?
I don't know. Hopefully he can get a second term. Then he's going to get the benefits.
I think if things continue the way the first month has gone, there won't be a second term. He may not finish the first term. But I think on the tax side that there are some interesting ideas have been proposed. One of them is this border adjustment tax, which is basically a value-added tax, which would tax imports but not tax exports. When you tax imports, the tax on things you buy that are made in China would go up significantly. But an argument is the cost of goods being sent to China would go down a lot, so Chinese people might buy a lot more of those. Problem with that is that American people probably don't want to see their prices go up significantly. Now, some economists argue, well, the exchange rate will adjust to affect that. But if the exchange rate adjusts to affect that, then the benefits on exports to China don't work. So I think this thing is probably dead in the water before it gets there, but it is an intriguing idea, and the U.S. tax system definitely needs to be reformed.
Mr. Koepp, your thoughts on this, the tax cut plan?
Well, Professor Gillis raised a really good, I think, summary of what the border adjustment tax represents. And it's interesting because that is actually favored, that's passed around and was originally promoted on the Republican side. But it is hard to see how it would be implemented under the current political environment, for one thing. And secondly, I think he made some valid observations that actually the net economic benefits are hard to really get excited about. What everyone seems to agree on, and it's tricky because as in China with the BIT and the vested interests that have made an extensively long negative list, in the U.S. tax reform is excruciatingly difficult because there are so many vested interests. But corporate tax reform, in any case, everyone seems to be behind that. The U.S. has an astronomically high corporate tax rate, which puts us at a huge competitive disadvantage. And that's the one thing that should be lowered. But instead, the Republicans tend to promote personal income tax reductions, which really aren't practical at this stage, and Professor Yao's points, indeed, there weren't real good results with that in the 80s. I don't think it's even feasible to do now. So I don't know what they're going to be able to achieve with that. It's necessary. Hopefully they'll do something with corporate tax, but Trump's going to have to be more sophisticated in the way he works with Congress to get some significant tax reform through.
Now, in the cooperation and private sector, Alibaba's group's founder, Jack Ma, met then President-elect Donald Trump in the beginning of this year, and he talked about cooperation in private sector through e-commerce. He wants to focus on small businesses. He said he looks forward to help create 1 billion jobs, or 1 million jobs, I should say, in 5 years for the U.S. Do you think that's a workable model? Is that possible?
Well, if Jack Ma can set up his business in the United States, that's possible, but there are still some obstacles over there. I think one of the biggest obstacles on the Chinese side is China's high tariff rates on consumer goods. So that's going to discourage imports from the United States. We look at China and Australia. Because of the FTA between those two countries, you just see dramatic decrease of the prices of wines in China. Right. So I think hopefully the two countries, United States and China, can sit down and talk about their free trade agreement.
Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think cross-border e-commerce has potentially great benefit, and I think we could see opportunities for small American manufacturers to sell goods to Chinese people. That's outstanding, and then the same thing could happen in the other direction, and both countries could benefit greatly for it. But there are significant problems with doing that no one's found a way around yet. The duties are part of transportation. How do you actually deliver goods? If you buy something in Iowa, is somebody in China willing to wait 2 weeks for it to come? You know, we're used to same-day delivery now in e-commerce, and so I'm not sure it's very easy to do the cross-border e-commerce, but with minds like Jack Ma's focused on it, perhaps they'll find a solution.
What do you think of this, Mr. Koepp, the potential and challenges on e-commerce cooperation between China and the U.S.?
Well, I also see the overture from Alibaba, Jack Ma there being a positive step forward in a way, but it's also a lot of PR, public relations wrapped into it. For one thing, Alibaba has been vociferously criticized for its violation of intellectual property rights with Taobao, the Tmall, and other aspects of its operation. So it really needs to, first of all, I think, get through that to truly, substantively, let's say, improve its relationship with the U.S. economy. That's one point. The other point is, indeed, part of what Jack Ma has been talking about is saying, hey, I can help Americans sell to China, but there are a lot of policy impediments beyond just the length of time it would take to deliver. I think the bigger issue isn't so much delivery time, but it's that you have to pay so many import duties on items coming in that it isn't practical.
Now, Trump's failure to repeal and replace Obamacare, as he promised in the campaign, has led many Americans question his capability as the president. Having failed to repeal that Obamacare, what is the likelihood that Trump will come up with something new with a feasible replacement, Professor Gillis?
Well, Trump had promised in the campaign to provide better health care to more people at a lower cost. Which is wonderful. Everybody would have supported that. But the proposal that he put forward did quite the opposite. The Republican proposal to repeal Obamacare actually covered far fewer people at a higher cost. And so it went down in flames as it should have. And there are attempts to recover it, but unless Trump is willing to work across lines with the Democrats, I don't see how we can come up with something that the conservative Republicans want, which is basically to get rid of any government involvement in health care, and the more liberal members of the Republican Party want, which is to make sure that people actually have access to health care. I don't think that problem is solvable the way they approached it. And so if Trump learns from that and learns to legislate across the parties, he might have a chance.
Professor Yao?
Well, I think from the first place, he shouldn't have done this, right? His electoral basis were basically those poor people, right? They actually vote him in. But this time, he wants to take benefits out of their hands. So I truly believe this is really a bad move. If he wants a second term, he shouldn't stop this. Obamacare has provided health care to millions of American people, those poor people. That's wonderful. I mean, the United States is the strongest country in the whole world. Can you imagine, 20 to 30 million people could not afford health care?
And out of all the disputes over geopolitical issues, what do you consider would be the largest challenge facing the U.S. and China economic relations in the foreseeable future?
I think the big challenge is going to be finding jobs for and really both countries face this. It's finding jobs for the uneducated part of their workforce, or the lesser educated part of the workforce. What we're seeing is that manufacturing is automating with robots, and increasingly people who are not at the top of their game are finding it very hard to be employed, whereas those that are well educated and well trained in modern skills have multiple job opportunities. And I think that's the big challenge really that both countries face. And if they could find a way to solve that problem together, it would be ideal.
President Trump wants to make America great again, and President Xi has a similar vision to rejuvenate China as a great nation. It seems like they probably have some similarity, more similarity than we think.
Well, my prediction is that by probably 2023, Chinese economy is going to be as large as the American economy. And those two countries' GDP is going to be larger than the sum of the third to the sixth countries in the whole world. So truly, in the near future, those two countries are going to dominate the world. Okay, so those two countries cannot afford to split with each other in terms of economics. So I would like to see those two countries to move together much more than that. As I said, the BIT is important. I hope in the near future the two countries can talk about FTA. That's going to benefit the United States much more than benefiting China, because American market is basically open, and the Chinese market is still has a high tariff on consumer goods. So that's going to be good for the United States.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you very much to all of you, Professor Yao and Professor Gillis joining us in Beijing studio, and Mr. Rob Cat joining us from our Hong Kong studio. And that does it for this edition of Dialogue. I'm the Yuan sitting for Young Ray tonight. Thank you for your company. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.